What we're going to be looking at next is how we can create our own custom navigation, both for the large and small screens. In a WordPress block theme, you can build different and custom navigations for large and small screens using a combination of block variations, custom templates, and CSS media queries. Let's go ahead and dive in and see how we can go about this. Currently, our website does have responsive navigation. You can see as my page gets smaller, at a certain point, I get the hamburger menu and it does have this navigation that shows up. However, the navigation that WordPress comes with by default is not styled in the way that I would like. It's not custom, and I want to make it a little bit different. Additionally, the media query is probably not at the right place for at least this many menu items, which we may not have, but you might want to be able to adjust this. So that's what we're going to be working on in this exercise. We'll begin by configuring the navigation to be just the way we want, and then we're going to create multiple navigation menus. We do this by going to Appearance, Editor, and we'll go to the navigation area. This by default contains all of the top level pages that currently exist in my website. I want to rearrange these and alter them, and as soon as I start to do this, I will get the option to edit the menu. I'm simply going to click Edit, which of course is going to allow me to make modifications. So we are not going to need the home item. We're going to make our logo, which doesn't exist in the header, but we will add that eventually. That's going to be a link to our homepage. Then we are going to reconfigure the order of these. So the sample page, we're not really using that. I'm just going to remove sample page, and we are going to use about, recipes, blog, and contact. So now you can see the menu is ordered in the way that I like. At this point, I'm going to go ahead and review the changes and save these changes. As you can see, we only have this one navigational element present, but it is possible to create multiple navigational elements. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go into the actions, and we're going to first of all rename this particular menu. So I'm going to go ahead and call this primary nav, and that's going to save it. And you can see the name has now changed. If we go back, we still have a navigation area, but now we are looking at our primary navigation. I will click the three dots under Actions, and we're going to go ahead and click Duplicate. This is going to allow us to make a copy, and I'll just go ahead and rename this for clarity, and we're going to call this Primary Nav Mobile. I'll save this, and if we want to make any changes to this menu, we certainly can. You can see that it does show us the menu item. In order to illustrate this, let's click on the menu, which takes us into the block editor. What we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and open up our list view. I'll open my primary nav mobile. Just to show that this is a little bit different, we're going to go ahead and add a search element. I'll click the three dots under contact and say add after. And we're just going to go ahead and add a block. I'm going to add a search. If we click on search and go to styles, we can go ahead and modify this. I'm going to round the corners slightly, and we'll go ahead and save the menu. If I go back out now and we go to our navigation element, you can see I have my primary nav mobile and my primary nav. Currently, our template is only showing the primary nav. What we need to do is we need to add both menus to our header template. Let's go ahead and do that now. I'll go back, I'll go into Patterns, Header, and here is our current header template. As you can see, this contains one navigational element. It has a placeholder for a site logo, and it has our site title and tagline. What we'll do here is we'll go ahead and we'll augment this. I'm going to add an additional navigation menu. I'll click the three dots to the right of primary nav, and I'm going to choose Add After. This will allow me to add a new element. I'm going to type in navigation and I will select my navigation. Now for me, it is placing my primary nav mobile. If for some reason you do not see your primary nav mobile, you'll want to go into the list view for the sidebar on the right. And here you can go ahead and you can choose which menu you want to toggle between. If you see two regular menus, just go to these three dots and choose your primary nav mobile. As you can see, I now have two different menus appearing. If I save my site and we go back to the front end and refresh, you're going to see that we have two menus. If we resize the page, both of these menus are currently responsive. So this is our mobile menu. It has the search item. This is our regular menu. Now, clearly, we do not need or want both of these menus. So let's configure this so that we don't have both of these displaying at the same time. What I'll do to begin with is I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to select my primary menu. This is my large screen menu. With this selected, I'm going to go to the settings area. And what we're going to do is we're going to select that we want the overlay menu to be off. This will prevent the overlay from ever occurring in our menu. So if I save our page now and we go back out, you will see if I resize the page down, the regular menu never collapses into a hamburger menu. The next thing that I'm going to do is I'll select my primary mobile menu and we're going to go to the settings and we're going to tell this to display as always being a hamburger menu. This will collapse the navigation so that it always displays as a mobile menu. At this point, if I save my page, you're going to see that I have one regular menu, this is my large screen menu, and one mobile menu. So now I have the menus and they're going to always work in this way, regardless of the page size. Let's go ahead and just make some other changes to our header template. I do not want this spacer, so I'm just going to delete this. And instead of displaying the site title and the tagline, I'm just going to display my logo. I already have a placeholder for site logo, but I have not yet chosen that. So I will select this. I'll choose the logo. I'm going to open my media library and I have a logo that has some text. This is what I want to display in my header. And at this point, I'm just going to get rid of this group right here. I no longer need the group that contains the site title and the site tagline. So I'll click these three dots and choose delete. That will prevent those items from being part of my menu. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to add a couple of custom classes. The classes are going to be necessary so that we can style these things in the way that we want. With the site logo selected, I'm going to reduce the image width a little bit. So I'm going to make this 100. And for whatever reason, when you resize the site logo inside of the WordPress editor, it does disappear, but this is only in the site editor. If we save our page and go back to the front end, you're going to see that the logo is going to display just fine. With the logo selected, I'm going to come into advanced and I will give this a class of site logo large so that I can hook this with CSS. I also want this to link to the homepage. That is already selected, so I'm good with that. I'm going to select the row that contains the site logo and I'll go to the styles and I just want to increase the padding on the right and the left. This will allow a little bit of spacing on the right and the left. And if you want to numerically set this, you can open these up and I might just set this to 2 rems. So now I'll have some spacing. If you noticed before, my menu was right at the edge, but now I'm going to have a little bit of spacing on the left-hand side, which I like better. Next, we'll move on and select our primary nav element. I'm going to go into settings and we'll go into advanced. We've already assigned the class that we're going to need, and we don't really need to do anything else here. Now that we have that, I'm going to create a group. So I'm going to click these 3 dots. I'll say add before. We're going to make a group here. And I'm going to drag primary nav mobile into this group. This will allow us to have a hook so that we can more easily get this. Now that I have that, I'm gonna go back to my primary nav and we're gonna set some styles here. So I'll go into the style category. And what we're gonna do here is we're going to set the text color. We'll be using this limey green color that we've created. Then I'm going to select my primary nav mobile. And if you click on the hamburger menu, it'll actually open the menu. It doesn't completely fit in the header, but you can scroll down so you can see what this looks like. What we're going to do here is we're going to go into advanced and we need to assign a custom class. We're going to use a class of nav small. Then I'll go to styles, and for styles, we're gonna set the text color to be our midnight blue. And we're gonna set the sub-menu overlay background to be our light gray color. And what I'm going to do to my navigational element is I'm gonna go ahead and add a site logo in the primary nav mobile. I currently don't have a link that goes to the homepage. And since the mobile navigation takes over the rest of the page, I think it would be appropriate to add a site logo. With my primary nav mobile item selected, I'm going to go into the list view. I'll click the plus sign and I'm just going to go ahead and add a site logo. The site logo is going to appear above everything else, so I'm going to drag this up and you can see here's my site logo. With the site logo selected, I'm going to reduce the size down to 100 like we did on the regular navigational menu. And as I mentioned before, as soon as you resize the SVGs, they do not appear inside of the WordPress editor, but it will work fine when we get to the front end. At this point, I just need to add some additional classes to some of my elements. So I'm going to select the group that contains the primary nav mobile. I'll go into advanced and we're going to add a custom class of nav small wrap. We've already assigned a custom class to primary nav. We had done that just a moment ago. I don't need a class on the row that encompasses the site logo. I do, however, have a class on site logo just in case I need to target that. I'm going to go to the row that actually encompasses all of these things, and we're going to go ahead and open up advanced, and we'll give this a custom class of menu wrap inner. And then finally, the overarching group that contains everything is going to have a custom class as well. And I'll give this a class of menu wrap. The classes are going to be there so that I can identify these things within the browser and I'll be able to hook them with my own custom CSS. Let's save our page. As you can see, this is what my page currently looks like. The regular menu is styled with the colors that we've assigned. The mobile menu is also taking on the styling that we specified. The last thing that I'm going to do before I start creating some custom CSS is I'm going to select the overarching group that contains everything, and we are going to go to the style area. We're going to set the background, and I'm just going to make the background color my almost black, and I think I'll just reduce the opacity of this slightly so it's just not quite as intense. I'll click save. And if we go ahead and look in the front end, you'll see that this whole area now has a dark background. And that will persist, not in our mobile menu, but it will persist in the large screen. And if we resize our screen down, that's obviously going to be part of what we have displayed on our page. At this point, we're ready to add some custom CSS. So we're going to start working mobile first. And what we want to have happen here is we do not want our large screen menu to display at all. We're going to need to hide this. And I also want to style the hamburger menu so it shows up a little bit better. And we're going to add some styles inside of the open mobile menu. I did want to point out that you can use your developer tools so that you can navigate through these various elements to see what the containing items are. You can see here's our custom class of menu wrap that we assigned. Here's our menu wrap inner. And then if we continue to open these elements and go into the various divs and containers, we can find our own custom classes. The custom classes are helpful when you're navigating through the developer tools. And then of course, it allows you to be more specific with your CSS and ensure that you're not going to overwrite something else. So here's my nav large. I want to hide that element. We'll start off by doing that. I'll jump into my code editor. I'm going to go into my style.css, and I'll begin by just making a comment that these are all rules that have to do with navigation. We're going to start off by using our .nav large, and we're just going to tell this to display as none, which will of course hide this from view. If we save that and we go back to the front end, you can see that now our large screen menu has disappeared. Now let's focus on this hamburger menu. It's a little bit difficult to see, so we're going to go ahead and add some custom styles to that element. Once again, if you use your developer tools and you fish or select the items, I call it fishing, you can go ahead and you can see what the elements are that are surrounding these. So this is a button right here. It contains an SVG, and the SVG actually has these little rectangles. That's what's making up these two lines that create our hamburger menu. So I'm going to be using those items to create my own custom CSS and style these things. We'll begin by creating a little bit of spacing on the right. I think that this is too close to the right, so I'm going to use my selector of nav small wrap to be able to get this item, and I'll use that as specificity as well. We'll use a hook of nav small wrap, and I'm just going to add a margin right of 2 ems. And because I know that this particular element is being controlled by some inline styles, I'm going to use the important modifier to assure that this will work, even though there's inline styles that are being applied. We're also going to use the .nav small selector, and we're going to get the rectangle elements that are part of the SVG. We're just going to add a little bit more height to those so that they will stand out a little bit more. So I'm going to set the height to 3 pixels. And then what I want to do is I want to grab this container itself. So if we look at this particular element, I want to get to this SVG right here, and you can see this is the rule that's currently controlling this. So this is where we're setting the current color of these lines. If I click on this and I make it something else, you can see that the line color is going to update. So this is how we could change the line color. We can also adjust the height and the width and add some other rules if we want. So I'm going to use this as a selector. I'll copy this because it's kind of long. And I'm going to go back to my CSS. I will use my .nav small wrap, and then I'll paste in this selector. This will allow me to be more specific, just in case this is being used elsewhere or these classes may be used on other elements. So I want to make sure that I'm being real specific. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to set the background color, and we're going to set this to our lime green color that we're using. I'll go ahead and I'll adjust the height of this element slightly. So I'm going to give it a height of 28 pixels. I'm going to add some padding to the right and the left. So I'll set it to 0 for the top and the bottom, 3 pixels for the right and the left. And then I'll slightly round the edges by using border radius of 3 pixels. I'm going to save this. And if we go back out to the front end portion and refresh, you're going to see that this now stands out a little bit more. It's easier to see. The one thing that I do want to do is, because my logo has some text, it optically, even though it's centered here, it doesn't look centered. I just want to pull this up a little bit. The easiest way for me to be able to do that is just to use a little bit of negative margin on the top. So if I set my margin top to be something like -8 pixels, it'll just pop it up a little bit, and that looks great. So we'll go ahead and add this to the selector. Once we've done that, we're going to go ahead and target the inner part or the open state of our menu. It is worth mentioning that it's a little bit difficult to find the elements because as soon as you click on your select an element, the menu will close. So I've found that the easiest way to do this is just to open all of the HTML elements. And if you just kind of keep opening them, like this is the close menu, here's the div that contains the unordered list, and here are my list items. So if I open those things up and then I click my menu, I can at least hover over the various elements and see what is controlling these things. You can see like here's this div that contains the unordered list. There's my unordered list. Here's my list items. And this is important because when you're assigning your CSS, you're going to want to find out what sort of things are controlling these. This might take a little bit more time to just wade through. You can select any of these elements and see if they have CSS assigned to them. But again, as soon as you click on anything, the menu is going to collapse. So just keep that in mind. I kind of already know what I want to do here. I'm going to center all of my content. I'm going to add a little border on the bottom to help separate these elements. I'm going to have these display as blocks so they'll be real easy for somebody to click using their finger. And we're just going to add some padding. So I'll jump back into my code editor. Before I forget, I'm just going to add this margin top of -8 pixels to the SVG element, and then we'll move on and assign our rules for this next item. We'll start off with nav small UL. And what we're going to do here is I'm going to tell this element to have a width of 100%. I don't know if you noticed before, but the UL is only as wide as my text. I want this to be 100%. This will make my navigational elements easier for a mobile user to use. I'm going to use text align center. And then we're going to go ahead and we're going to target the LI items. So once again, I'm going to use nav SM, and then we'll use ULLI to get to the list items. I'm going to add a border on the bottom, and we'll set that to solid 1 pixel. We'll go ahead and use our same kind of limey green that we're using elsewhere in our site. I'm going to have these display as block elements, and once again, I know that there are some inline styles that are overriding this, so I'm going to add my important modifier to ensure that this rule will override any other rules. Then we'll go ahead and we're going to set the width of these elements also to 100%, and I'm going to add some padding on the top of 15 pixels. And let's go ahead and save and jump into the front end and check out what we've done. So if we refresh and we open our menu, you can see that now we have some additional styles, and it looks like maybe I need a little bit of padding on the bottom as well. So we'll need to add that in because I don't like how these are sitting right on top of the lines. And we're also going to need to center our search form. I don't like this little outline that's around the entire search form, so I'm going to get rid of that. And I'm going to change the search button color. I'll pick up this blue color from my logo. So I'm going to take care of those things next. Let's go ahead and just add padding here. And we'll add padding of 15 pixels to the top and the bottom. And let's try just adding 5 pixels to the right and the left. I also need to figure out what the class is that's on that form button. So here's the form item. Here's the label. Inside of that, we have the div that contains the input, and then here is our search label. So if we open this up, you can see here's the button, and here is the form element itself. So I can go ahead and use these as selectors so that I can apply the appropriate CSS. And it doesn't look like my padding showed up on my list items, so let's try to figure that out. Did I not save my page? Oh, I didn't save my page. All right, that spacing is a little bit better, but it is a little bit too much on the top. So I'm going to reduce that down a little bit. I'm not totally sure if there's additional padding on the A elements or the span. It doesn't look like it. So I'm not sure what's causing this additional padding unless there is some kind of CSS flex box, which maybe has a gap or something like that. It looks like gap is set to inherit. So let's go ahead and let's just reduce that down a little bit. You might need to play around with these numbers, but maybe we make the padding 5 for the top, 5 for the left and right, and we'll try 15 for the bottom. I'll come back and check that once I add my other rules. I'll start off by setting the background color for my search button. I'm using my nav small, and then we're going to target the button. This has a class of WP block search underscore button, and I'm using a blue shade on that particular element. Then I'm going to target the border that's around that form element. I've already kind of fished around and found the selector for that. So I'm going to use this selector right here. And finally, I want to ensure that this search item is going to be centered. We're going to have to target the form to be able to do that. So let's just refresh. This is starting to come together. Maybe I don't even need any padding on the top, but you can see here's my form element. And it looks like we didn't get rid of our border, so we'll have to look into that a little bit more. If we drill into this element, I can kind of check and make sure that I'm using the correct selector. So here's the form. Let's just open these all up so we can see everything. And then I will try to hover over and figure out what it is. So there's a div right here that might have the border on it. It looks like that's it. So this is the selector I'm going to need, and maybe I just didn't have that quite right. I'll just copy that, and this should be a descendant of our nav small. That's going to wrap around everything. Here it is right here, nav small. So you can see that this is a descendant of that. So we'll leave that on our CSS. Let's just go ahead and make sure that this is the correct selector. And again, I'm just going to try to play around with the numbers for my padding right here. All right, now you can see the color. I've removed that border. And then finally, we're just going to need to grab this whole form. And I believe we can use margin on this element. So let's go back and use .nav small. We're going to use form, and then we'll just use margin auto. Let's see if this is enough. We may have to be a little bit more specific, but let's give this a try. So we'll refresh our page, open up the menu, and there we go. Now our search bar is centered, and I'm liking the spacing on this. So this is now looking pretty good. As you can see, we've added some custom CSS to make sure that this works exactly the way we want. So at this point, I think our mobile menu is looking good. What we need to concentrate on next is what happens at the large screen. So the first thing we need to do is at our large screen, we want to hide this mobile menu, and we want to bring our regular navigation back into view. So let's go ahead and create a media query to do this. I'm going to use @media, and then we'll just use a min width. And the value that I'm going to use is 782. I just determined that based on the size of my menu, this number works. You may need to adjust this value depending on how many navigational items you have. You might have to change that a little bit. And what we're going to use is we're going to target the small menu, and we're going to make it go away. So if we look at our small mobile menu right here, and we're going to want to get the parent element, you can see that here's this div. We have this class of nav small wrapper. Inside of that is our navigational elements. So we should be able to use nav small wrapper. That should work. You can see nested right inside is our nav with nav small, but I'm going to try for nav small wrap. And we're just going to tell this to have a display of none. And then what we're going to do is we already hid our nav large up here. So we're just going to bring this back into view. And just to make things a little bit more succinct, let's just put this on one line because it'll be easier to see. So I'm just going to paste in this line, and we'll change this to block. I'm going to save my page, and we will come back and refresh. And you can see that the small menu disappeared, and the large screen menu is now showing. Now it is stacked. It's probably because this ultimately was using flex instead of a display of block. So I'm going to try to just change this to have a display of flex. Because it's a list, it probably needs to use flex so that the elements sit side by side. And there we go. That's looking much nicer. Again, these are a little too close to the edge. I've probably complained about this. I'm not a huge fan of it. So I'm going to add a little bit of spacing on the right. And that is starting to come together pretty nicely. Let's just add a margin right of maybe 2 rems. All right, that didn't move these guys. So let's just take a quick look and figure out what is containing these elements. Here is our nav element, and this has the class of nav large. You can see that margin right is getting overwritten. That's because there's some more specific CSS. So we could either be as specific or just add important, or we could probably just change this to padding, right? Yeah, padding looks like it'll work. So I'll probably do that. So at this point, our site is looking good. Here's our large screen, looks great. Small screen goes to the mobile. The mobile's looking good. You may think that you're done, but there's one other thing I want to draw your attention to, and that is if you're on a really large screen, the logo and the menu are going to spread out to the far left and the far right. I am not a huge fan of this. I don't like my menu to just be as wide as the page. I kind of like it to be a little bit contained. So what we're going to do is we're going to use the inner wrapper. And if you recall from what we did before, we created the menu wrap inner, and then right above that we have menu wrap. So menu wrap is where we assign that background color. This menu wrap inner is on the inside, and I'm just going to put a maximum width on this so it doesn't get any wider than whatever it is that I determine. So let's go ahead and add that, and we'll probably need to do a little bit of margin auto so it stays centered. I'll change this to padding because we know that works. And again, I'm still inside of my media query. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to add a rule for dot menu wrap inner, and we'll set a max width. I think I'll just use 1200 pixels, and then I'm going to set my margin to auto. And I kind of feel like I need an important modifier on there. We'll check it out, but I'm almost positive that this element is going to need a modifier for important. Let's save this up and take a quick peek. So now if we refresh and my page is really wide, you can see that the navigational content stays somewhat centered. And then of course, this is still fully responsive. Everything works good. And I think that's all we need to do for our navigation. As you can see, we created 2 menus inside of WordPress. This is a little bit of a hidden feature inside of WordPress in the block themes anyways, but it is totally possible to create multiple menus. And if you combine those with a little bit of CSS, you'll have a lot more flexibility in the way the menus work, and you can style them a lot differently. You can basically customize the menus and make them work in ways that is not possible if you just use the straight responsive menu from WordPress. I hope you've enjoyed this lecture and that you'll be able to make creative menus with your custom themes.